Well, at first I didn't think I was going to have to take this thing apart like this, but I ended up having to take the governor apart. And, like one of the weights that goes in here, yeah, it goes in this way. It had a bolt in it like this. We don't do away with that. The other side had a cotter pin. That's what it's supposed to have in it, so we're going to replace those. So I wanted to clean that up, but the main reason I had to take this apart, this rod that goes through here that actuates the balls swing out and actuate this rod here. That rod inside there was real sticky and real gummy, and I've ended up taking little pieces of rag like this with a screwdriver and shoving it through there, kind of like you're cleaning a gun barrel, and got that all cleaned out. And now that that rod fits real loose in there. And also the other issue was where it goes in here, it goes this way. It didn't turn real good. This had a lot of rust buildup and stuff in here, so wanted to get that cleaned up. So I got the shaft cleaned up real good, got the bore cleaned up real good, so we're good there. I've had to make some new wear plates, and this is a shim that I've had to make, and I'll show you what's going on with that here in a minute. Issues there. Gear's good. All these pieces got cleaned up. Even this piece would not pivot very easily on here. And on the governors now, all these parts have to work absolutely perfectly in order for it to latch out and slow down and do all the characteristics that we want in our running of these engines. These old springs here that go between the balls, they're going to have to be replaced. I want to put smaller springs on so that it will throw out a little easier and the engine will run a little slower. I'll do that all part of the tuning of the engine once I get it together. But I've mocked the engine up in order to time it, and I'll go through that with you. I've had all this together and on the engine, and this piece doesn't fit. I'll take you over there here in a minute and show you. We're going to have to end up relieving a little bit of this. It sits on the engine and rocks. This part's high, this part touches, these parts do not, so that allows it to rock back and forth, and this has to be bolted pretty darn good without any movement onto the engine frame. So I'll show you that here in a second. So we're going to have to do some modifications on this piece. And when it come to me, this piece was on there, but the gears were really misaligned. So lots of stuff I need to do here to get this squared up to where the gears will mesh correctly. And it'll, live a long time without any issues. It's all part of going through one of these engines. You got to take care of all these issues, so that when it comes time to run the engine and enjoy the engine, use it, whatever you want to do, you don't have a bunch of stuff that's wrong with it, and you got to, hassle with it every time you want to pull it out and run it or take it to a show or something. So I try to eliminate all those problems at the get-go here. So that's what I'm trying to do. Trying to put it back together better than it was put together, obviously, at the factory. So in order to continue getting the engine set up here, I have mocked up the head. It's just on a couple bolts, and there's no gasket in here yet. I wanted to get it on so I could put the rocker on it and set the timing. I'll go through that with you here in a little bit. I wanted to get this cam timed correctly, and in doing all that, that's when I figured out this piece here doesn't fit right. This is where the push rod, the push rod goes on here and runs up through here, and this holds the governor gear and fly ball system. So I'll show you that here in a second, but in order to in order to do that, I had to do that, you know, mock that up. So it's a process. But let me reposition the camera. I'll show you what we're working with here. Okay, I've got you in kind of an awkward position there, but it's the best I can do, actually. I've gone ahead and put the gear back on, the shaft back in, because I want you to see this alignment. So let's go on here. And I'm even going to put the bolts in it and get it where it actually bolts on. And I've had this piece on and off a dozen times. You know how it is when you're working on stuff, getting things squared away. So here's what we've got. I don't know, you may not be able to see this alignment of the gear. I'm not real worried about that yet, but what I'm worried about is this rock right here. And when you tighten these bolts down, it's not bearing on this surface out here or the one back here where you can't see it. It's bearing on the center. So that allows it to rock back and forth, and that's going to allow movement on this piece, and that's not good. So apparently it was been like this, unless they shimmed it somehow from the factory, but I don't know. All I know is what I'm dealing with right now. If there were shims in there, I did not get them, and they were not in there. So I've got to make them. So anyway, I've got to eliminate this rock, and that's what I've made this shim for. This shim will go back behind there, and it kind of contours the frame of the engine. The bolts will go through it, and that will shim the gear out this way to mesh correctly with the cam gear. So I don't know if you can see that or not, but let me move the camera a little bit. Maybe you can. There you go. That's what I was kind of dealing with there. That's the misalignment I was dealing with. That's how the engine came to me right there. And what I've got to do is get this squared up here like so. And I'm going to do that with shims back here. And I'm also going to eliminate this rock. So let me pull these bolts out again. There we go. And this piece right here, this is too tall. So I'm going to shave this down just a little bit and make it fit the contour of the engine frame. And so it at least sets square on there without rocking. Then I can put my shim in there and get my distance on the gear, on the timing of the governor gear to the cam gear. So that's the next trick. All right, it's really hard to see in there, but I've come up with a combination of shims. Let me see if I can get you down here close enough. There we go. And let me get a pointer. Here's the shims we're dealing with right here. There's a couple of them there. One of them's a thin one. And the other one's the shim, the big shim that went back behind there. Got a good fit on it. And I'm able to not rock it or anything. It feels real good. And to give you an idea, here they are here. So anyway, let's get this back off and get this unit together and get it on here for good. Okay, it wants to constantly turn so that it's tightening the gear onto the shaft. So it turns that way, and I want these cotter pins, the heads of them, to be the leading edges. So they'll be less likely to catch something. And I'll probably cut these off a little shorter when I get back over there. And these springs go on here, and I'll replace those, of course. Could re-stretch these, but I'm not going to do that. Just going to replace them with new. Be done with it. Get that hooked that way and this hooked this way here. There we go. Rod goes in there good. I've also dressed off the ends. They were kind of battered on the ends there. And I've ground that off and tapered those just a little bit. So then that works and looks good. This will go like this. This has already been turned around once. This goes down through here and that threads in there. See it coming through under there. The big nut went on the bottom. Let's see. And I've had to dress up the nuts. They were, somebody's had pliers or a pipe wrench or something on them, so that's all part of the restoration too. Put these nuts back on here. This isn't going to slip off here anyway because this thread is bigger than the hole through the deal. So let's see, do I have the right nut? I don't think I've got the wrong nut there. I think the big nut goes on top. Yes, it does. Little nut goes on the bottom. Really no adjustment on this part. As long as there's no up and down movement. Then I can lock that. Like so. That works nice. So does the pin. Pin works great too, so. Now, this goes in here. And make sure I've got it correct here. And I do not. Goes like this. Like so. This goes on the bottom. And that runs right in there like that. My plate will go on there like that. And I'll lube all this up just so I don't have to swim in the oil here. I'll lube all this up after I get it together. The oil holes are all free. And let me get a screwdriver and tighten that. There we go. Ah. Now let's go back over there and pop it on there. Okay, I think I've got you positioned where you can see what's going on here. And I'll roll it over a little bit and let you watch the valve action. And seems to be working fine. So let me run you through this. Now, also, the exhaust action here is how you set the timing and how you set the cam gear up. So what you want to happen, what you want to happen, is right now we're on the exhaust stroke. Let me just close the exhaust valve here. It just closed. Now we're on the intake stroke. You can see the rod here is pulling the piston back. And once we get the piston back, now we're on the compression stroke. We're going to come up and this rod here is going to start moving forward and trip the igniter. I don't have that together yet. I'll get that set up next. But then the igniter trips right here. We're just before top dead center. That's where our igniter trips. Now we're on the power stroke, pushing the piston back. And just as soon as we get back to bottom dead center, we want this exhaust valve to begin to open. You can hear it right on there now. It just took the lash up And right at bottom dead center, it's just now opening the valve. So this is the exhaust event. We are pushing the piston forward, shoving out the exhaust. And just as soon as we get to top dead center, right there, now I get my lash back. The exhaust valve is closed, and we begin the intake stroke again. So if you set that sequence up, no matter whether you got timing marks or not, if you set your cam to sequence the exhaust valve with the piston at the correct time, and there's only one time, then it'll run fine. So you want your, we are power, there we are exhaust, and we want the exhaust valve to open at bottom dead center. We want the exhaust valve to close at top dead center. Simple as that. If you set your cam so that those events happen in that order, then you're good to go. So that's all it takes to properly set the timing. The rest of it, the ignition timing and such, we can adjust here on this rod and adjust when that occurs. And I always like to have that occur just before top dead center, about 10, 12 degrees, something like that. Sometimes less. I mean, sometimes at top dead center makes an easier starting engine, and one that runs a little softer, doesn't fire quite as hard. So there we go. I think I've mocked this up for the last time. I got my shims in there. I'm going to have to do some springing here. That's part of the fine tuning. Got the return spring on here. It's a new spring. I made a new plate for this. I need to get that tightened up. And when you put a head gasket on, then you can adjust this. This is your fine adjustment for when the intake valve or the exhaust valve opens and closes. And that is subject to how thick your head gasket is. So this head's still loose on here, see? So once I get a head gasket on, get the head tightened down, which is one of the next things I can do, then we know all this is good. We're correct with the timing, and we're good for building out the rest of the engine. So hope that didn't bore you too much. Thanks for sticking with me. If you're still with me, thanks for sticking with me on this, and I'll keep going here, and I'll bring you back when things get a little more interesting. Okay, while you weren't looking, I went ahead and put the cylinder head on permanently. The igniter is on now. This still needs to be adjusted here. I haven't gotten to that yet, but I wanted to show you the operation of the igniter. And we're just at the end of the intake stroke now. The piston's moved back. We're coming up on compression. You'll notice this rod's moving forward. We're going to get to top dead center right there, and that's where it clicked. Did you hear that click and see it click there? Let's do it one more time. Coming up, top dead center, click. So I've got this set up fairly soft to where it'll run, very softly. I don't want it to fire too much ahead of top dead center. That'll make it hard to start, and also will we just don't need to be making that much power with it just sitting and running at a show. So we can always adjust this. You loosen this nut here and run this rod here in and out. In will give it a little bit quicker. We'll advance it back this way. We'll retard the timing. So just wanted to set you up here and show you that. This is the speed control here. All this does is apply spring pressure to the governor and allow the governor weights to fly out a little easier when you take the spring tension off, and slows it down. So it's time to work on the fuel system. Let's get over to the bench and take a look at the fuel system. There's a lot of cleaning to do on that. I've already started on that. Let me show you what we're up to over there. All right, what I've done is I've taken a torch and actually heated up all these fittings so I could actually get them apart. Here's a union here, for example. And all this stuff is just full of dirt. You can see it coming out there. And I've got to get all of that petrified fuel, which is now baked petrified fuel, out of the system. And evaluate which one of these fittings. Of course, I had to get those out, I had to crush them. So those nipples are going to be easy to replace, but they are out of there. So all these fittings, this is the fuel mixture here. This is the spray bar. It's just full of junk. I have to take like a ice pick or something and run through all these fittings and get this apart here for you. Look at all the junk coming out of there. This one I'm concerned about. This one's got the check in it, and it's like a pellet, a little brass pellet in there. It's not wanting to come out. It's stuck in there pretty good. And anyway, that's this long pipe here. I'm going to have to take a rod and stick through it. I think I got that loose, didn't I? Yeah. And wires, rods, ice picks, whatever I can stick through there, knock out the big chunks, and I'll go over and put it in the bead blaster, and we'll blast everything. This union, I don't know if that's savable or not. It's not looking real good right there, but we will try. I'll try to save all the original parts that we can here. Lots of stuff coming out, but hey, at least it's coming out, right? So let me go ahead and get this stuff blasted, cleaned as good as possible. I may go ahead and put it all back together and bring it back when we're ready to, go on to the next step. Okay, so we've got everything cleaned up here. And the only casualty I had was the primer valve here. This drips gasoline into the cup to prime it, and that broke off, so trying to get it out. So I don't have one. We're going to look for one. I got a plug to put in there. I've been looking through these lots of little fittings and such here that I've gone through to find little things. I tried to use like fitting like this one, but that's an 1/8 inch. This is 1/4, and by the time I adapt, 1/4 to an 1/8 is too long, so just going to hold off. Probably at a flea market or a show I will find the right valve, and we'll go from there on that. So that's not going to hold up anything. Let me show you what's going on with the check valve. Here's a check valve body. This little piece here is the only thing that was left of the check valve in there, and of course it couldn't be used. You can't put a ball in there because there's too much room inside the housing. There's just too much room in there, and a ball would float around in there and finally get dislodged before it's set on its seat. So what I've come up with, this is the cap. So this is the check. I'm going to call this a plunger. I just made this. Took some inside dimensions and what I think needs to happen, and made this piece. I think I made it out of like a little fitting. I don't know if I've got one around here similar to this, and just started turning it down. Anyway, came up with this. So this sets down in there and on the seat like that, and I don't know if you can see in there, but there's not a whole lot of room in there for fuel to flow up through. So I drilled a couple of pilot holes in it, so when this actually lifts up off the seat, it'll expose a pilot hole. I don't know if you can see it in there or not. I'll lift it up with my finger, and then it'll expose that pilot hole in there. Probably can't see it, but that'll let the fuel in. So also, it's made to be guided up in the lid here so that this thing can float up and down, but not get dislodged, so that it falls back down seats every time. Now, I've tested it with air, and it is working, so we're going to put that together. That top screws in there like so, and it works, and works pretty good. I've got a test fluid that I use here. It's gasoline. So it holds fine, and so we're going to use it. That is that. This is the spray bar, and it had a plug soldered in the end of it here, and I lost that during the process of heating everything up, taking everything apart. So I went ahead and made a new cap for it and soldered it on. And then just a while ago when I walked back in the shop, I found the original. It was just a head of a rivet, looks like. It was stuck down in there and soldered on. So, hey, whatever, same thing. It'll work fine. This goes into the elbow that goes into the head, and the fuel comes in here from the check and gets lifted into the engine. So anyway, that's all the pieces. I've had to replace a couple of new parts here with just these close nipples that you saw earlier that got destroyed. So I'm going to go ahead and assemble this, and I'll bring you back when we get it on the engine, and I'll explain to you exactly how everything works. The valve come out good. I had to repack this up here, the packing, but the needle valve came out fine, and so we'll use it. The only thing I'm going to have to do is on this union, I'm going to make a gasket. It's cleaned up fairly well, but these two mating parts here have to seal, and I'm going to make a gasket to go in there, and that'll, when you tighten this up, that'll seal on the gasket. That way we'll be able to use the original hardware. Trying to use as much original hardware on the whole engine as we can. I don't want to put any modern stuff on if we can keep from it. This is the shut off. I'm not a huge fan of this. I think this was an afterthought. This is a huge point for a leak. I don't know at this point if I'm going to use that or not, so jury's still out on that. But let me get this back together. These little these fittings, you can't find fittings like this anymore that are rounded, and it don't say China on them. So that's why we really wanted to use the original stuff here if we could. These old fittings are just classic. So I'll get her together here and bring you back here in a minute. Okay, so I'll go through the fuel system with you here. Here's the tank. It mounts back here on this plank. Fitting comes out. There's a spot for a valve, shut-off valve. I haven't got it in there yet. The line goes forward up to the check valve into the T. This is where the primer would go, the primer valve with a little tube sticking in here. This cup can be filled with gasoline to prime the engine. This is our check valve. We come up here to the mixture control valve right here. This is a piece of rubber I cut to seal the spray bar where it enters this elbow. And then to keep pressure on that, I just fabricated a spring that wraps around here and keeps forward pressure on it. That way, you know, things can wiggle, move around. It's flexible. Nothing should break. So, and I've also had the engine running a short time, and it has developed another problem. And let me show you what's going on here. I'll bring you back here in a second. As you can see, I just fitted the head back on here to show you how these fittings go. There's no valves in it now. The head's loose. We've got an issue of it blowing head gaskets. And let me take the head off. We'll go back over the bench. I'll show you what's going on.